Hi, and welcome to, I think this is lecture number 18 or 19 in the Sefer Kuzari. We are in the Ma'amar Hasheni, which is the second essay, about to learn paragraph number 27, or Chav Zayin. In this version, the Korobkin version here, that many of you have, it is on page 196. And and we are going to begin. So now we're in the middle of a discussion here where the Kuzari began by asking Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, asking the chaver, asking the rabbi, um, what's the purpose and point of the carbonot, right? And his main question is what's the purpose of the sacrifices? Like, how are these sacrifices? It seems the Torah seems to indicate the simple meaning of the words that God derives some sort of pleasure, some wonderful scent that God enjoys. That's what it sounds like on the surface of it, at least. Um, and that we're giving him some kind of pleasure, and that it's his sacrifice. So the Kuzari pointed out that first of all, absolutely not. We're not giving God anything. God doesn't derive any pleasure from anything. Um, However, what the way he described it was he described the temple as a representation, the temple and the services within the temple as a representation of how we as a people um, serve and worship God. And he used that, and the temple became a metaphor, like a physical manifestation of a metaphor for the organs of a person, of a human body, and the temple being the place, the heart, where and the mizbeach, the altar, being the heart through which the just like the heart in medieval medicine, as we described last time, understood that the heart is the center of where an innate life force is present, and that life force is pumped from the heart out to the extremities. So too the flame of God, which came down miraculously from the heavens onto the altar and burned on the altar, that flame contains this special essence of godliness, which is, so to speak, pumped out to the people, and the people receive it through the worship and the sacrifices and so on that are going on. And so that was how he described it last time. So the Kuzari, the king of the Khazars, is going to try to drag this analogy a little further, right? Now, and it's important for us to remember what I described last time as the understanding of medieval medicine, right? And we have to remember that they thought, right, and this is now it is more important to realize that they did understand, because Galen was able to understand that the commands for actions came from the brain. They knew that, and because of experiments and things that Galen had done in the third century. However, they understood that the heart was the source of life, and that the heart was pumping through the blood life to all the extremities of the body, that there's a life force, and that emotions and the feelings that we have, and the wisdom and so on that we have is contained within the heart. So they understood the heart as not just like we understand it today as basically a pump. They understood it as containing the soul, right, or this godly essence. So the same thing, he used the metaphor for the mizbeach, for the altar. So Amra Kuzari, the king of the Chazars, said to the chaver, to the rabbi, he said, and when I read, I'm reading kind of back and forth, but I'm reading from the Michael Schwartz Hebrew translation, but just follow in whatever translation you have in front of you. You made a beautiful comparison. It was a really wonderful parable. It was really nice. I loved your speech, Hechaver, my friend, the rabbi. Ulam lo rosh uluchushav lo shamati hashva. What about the head and the senses, right? They understood that the sensations, somehow related. They didn't really have a concept of a nervous system, the way we do today, but they did understand that somehow the head communicated, and the senses, because you see the eyes, the nose, the mouth, these are all in the head. So the head is sensing things from the outside, and it's feeling things, right? Lo shamati hashva v'lo l'shem hamishcha. I didn't hear any comparison. How does that fit into this scheme of yours? And how does the oil of the anointing oil, how does that fit in? So Amar HeChaver, says the Chaver, the rabbi answers him as follows. Achein shoresh hachachma. Oh, you're remembering the main thing. Even though I told you that this life force was coming from the altar, right? And we also talked about the menorah, which was wisdom and wealth from the shulchan, from the showbread table, and all kinds of things. But where does Torah come from? That the center of wisdom is special, is placed in the Aron, in the ark, right? Shehu b'vchinas halev, which is similar to the heart. Okay, remember, in those days they're thinking that the heart is the center of wisdom. Okay, V'hu aseres hadibros, and that is the 10 Commandments, right? Because we know the luchos upon which the 10 Commandments are written, or the 10 statements, aseres hadibros, the 10 statements are written, were contained within the ark. V'toldosehem, and all of those things that come out of them. The Kuzari is saying this because it's assumed that you know that the 10 dibros, the 10 sayings, are in some way are like the basics from which are derived all of the 613 mitzvos, right? Commandments. Betzido, the Torah, which is next to it, which is why the entire Torah is right next to it. So the 10 Commandments are inside, and the entire Torah is right next to it. Misham mista'afos teach chachmos, and from there the two kinds of wisdom emanate from there. Chachmas haTorah shenos'eha hakohanim, the wisdom of the Torah, which was carried by its primary teachers, at least in those days, were the Kohanim, the priests. The Chachmas hahiskalos, and the wisdom of divine revelation, of prophecy, shenos'eha hanavim, which was the domain of the prophets. Heim hayu b'vchinas hayoatzim, those were the ones that gave advice, and hamavchinim, who were able to tell what's going on, to understand things. Hamazir mesuma, and they would warn the nation, to repent, and how to correct their ways, and how to act, and so on. Haroshmim, and would keep records. Kosvei divrei yamim, and the ones who wrote down the histories, because we know the various prophets were traditionally considered to be the writers of the various books attributed to them. Heim efo rasha umo. So they are really the head of the nation. So the bottom line is where is the head, right? The head is the Torah. The head is the wisdom of the nation, and that is represented by the ark. So now, so then the Chazar king has a very interesting question, right? So, and remember, one of the things that's interesting is it's tempting for us to understand the Kuzari here, to understand what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is telling us, as these things are representations of a concept and an idea, right? They're the representations of an idea that the Torah is like the mind and brain and wisdom of the people. The heart and soul of the people is our special relationship with God and worship and service and so on. But not to think, but we're tempted to say, and the Migdash, the temple, is some kind of representation of these concepts and ideas. But remember, Rabbi Yehuda Levi is saying more than that. He's saying that the Beis HaMikdash was actually these things, right? He's not just saying that it's a metaphor. And it's very tempting for us to jump in modern days and say that this is just a metaphor. And it's nice, and personally, that's how I like to look at it, as more of a metaphor than to say that the Mizbeach was actually the spot through which God emanated through there to the world. I'll say, I'm admitting my own tendencies here. I don't really, it doesn't turn me on, so to speak, to think that way, right? But however, remember that that's not what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is teaching us here. He's teaching us that this is what actually occurred in that spot. So then the next question becomes obvious. The Chazar king asks in paragraph 29, So now you guys, you Jews, or he says you, even though this is taking place after his conversion, so it's really him too. So then you guys, your nation, you're people, you have no head and you have no heart, right? You're walking around, and that whole head and heart business, that place through which you were receiving this wisdom and sustenance and the godliness and all these things, where are they? Your guys are lost, right? You guys you don't have a head. You're dead, basically, without a head and a heart. You're a nobody. So Omar Chaver, so the Chaver answers, and he basically says, and on a level, on a certain sense, you're right, right? Yisera mizos, more than that. Anachnu kamoshe amarta. All right, right. It's even worse than what you're saying. Not only are we like without a head and without a heart, afilu loguf, we're pretty much almost as if we don't even have a body, right? Elaivarim mifuzarim, we're like a bunch of scattered bones, b'vchinas ha'atzamos ha'aveshus, just like the dry bones. Asheros on Yechezkel, like if when you read the book of Ezekiel, one of the most famous chapters of the prophets, of course, is Ezekiel's vision of the valley of dry bones, which of course is a metaphor for the Jewish people, right? After so much death and destruction, and the vision of Yechezkel is that just like the dry bones can come back to life, and so on, so will the Jewish people again arise and come back to life, so to speak. So Rabbi Yehuda Halevi here is saying in the mouth of the Chaver, he's saying that we are the same thing. We are like a valley of dry bones, right? We don't even have limbs, let alone, we're scattered arms and legs and fingers and noses, but we're just scattered nothing, right? Aval, however, even though you're right, we don't have the temple anymore. And remember, you already criticized me, right? And said we don't have the land of Israel anymore, or at least at this time when this book is being written, right? Asher no sarlahan teva mitive balayachayim. These bones, right, which they still do have, right? That they are still left some resemblance to the living creatures from which they came. They once were limbs to a heart, or laruach with a spirit, and a nefesh, a soul, and a seichel, and a mind, and a brain. But so such limbs are tovos, are better than gufim utsavim mishayesh, than if you just had like statues that are made out of marble. So if you took a bunch of strewn bones that were once human, that were once people, that's different than strewn bits and pieces of puppets and dolls and statues, right? Even if they happen to have eyes and noses and ears and mouths and fingers and toes. That those never had any spirit of life. It's impossible to even imagine that they will ever be alive. Right? Right? But we're different because we once were, and the implication then being, and we'll see more, he's going to get into it in just a minute, right? Because we once were, we can become reattached and we become re-enlivened, so to speak, as the special vision of Yechezkel, of Ezekiel, stated. So 31, Amar Kuzari, the Chazar king said, Kenu kasher amarta. You're right. That's a very good point. So then the Chaver continues in paragraph 32. Amar Chaver. So he says, and now we are on page 198 at the bottom on the Korobkin version. So the rabbi answers and says something else interesting, right? And he says that our nation, and here's where we're starting to get a deeper and deeper understanding of the way the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi understands the relationship between the Jewish people and the other nations of the world that don't have access to the Torah. This again, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but this is an extremely different view of it than the Maimonides and the Rambam had, and but it's this is really the foundation stone for a lot of post Kuzari thinking in Judaism, which became, in a large segment of the Jewish people, standard Jewish thought. But this is really the Kuzari introducing this idea into Jewish philosophy, and until it became so standard, especially in the Kabbalistic realms. And so let's see what he says. So Amar Chaver ha'umos hamesos, but those nations that are dead, right? Asher bikshu lehidamos l'uma hachaya, that wanted to compare themselves to the nation that were alive. So what he's saying here, in unequivocal terms, right, is he's comparing the other nations of the world, and I don't want you to miss this, to those pieces of statues, right? So imagine a valley of dry bones that were once people, and a valley of human parts which were never people, which never had that special godly characteristic pumped through their arteries and veins, so to speak, by the heart and soul, which was represented by the temple, right? They have tried so many times to be like the live nation, the nation that was at least at a time in history fully alive. Lo also be yoser me'asher hidamos chitones. They were never successful, only maybe to be similar in certain external ways, but they were never successful in achieving the high level, the special level of spirituality that the Jewish people have achieved. Hem hekimu batim leElohim, right? They established houses to God, whether that was God with a capital G or whatever God they were serving with a small g. Regardless, they established temples. Lo v'lo afia b'ansim leElohim, but nothing happened in those temples that represented God's presence. In the Jewish temple, God came down, so to speak, with a flame that came from heaven, right? And other miracles that occurred, at least in the first temple, right? Heim nagu befrishos, and then they tried to act in certain ways with asceticism, with fasting and various forms and practices. His nazru, and they became ascetics, kadelish, and they or monks or whatever. Kadesha has galas anavus tishalan, in order to achieve the level of prophecy, velo sharsa, but they never had prophecy. Now, obviously, if you would talk to someone who was a member of a different religion, they would tell you that that's not true, that they had prophets. But this is Rabbi Yehuda Levi speaking, and he's telling you that they never had prophecy, that the only real prophecy that ever occurred was within the context of the Jewish people, and he made that point numerous times in many different contexts. And I already said you can debate all the non-Jewish prophets in the Tanakh. We left that subject a couple of weeks ago. But so they tried these things. Heim pashu himru v'nagu befritzos, and then they and the contrast, which was interesting, is they also, one of the special qualities of the Jewish people is that when we rebel, we get punished, right? In other words, he's saying the very proof that we get punished by God, that he cares so much about us. So the inference being that we have this special relationship, so that when we act properly, when we practice these proper practices, the worship of God and asceticism within its appropriate context, and especially worship God, we will receive prophecy. And the flip side, when we do the opposite, we will get punished. But those nations, when they practiced all these spiritual practices, they didn't get prophecy. And when they rebelled, Himru v'nagu b'pritzos, and they did all kinds of inappropriate things, v'lo yard alein eish min hashamayim, flames didn't come down from heaven to consume them. V'lo ba magefa pisum, they didn't suddenly get slammed with plagues, la'ames, shehi onish me'elohim alosameri, in such a way that it was so clear that it wasn't just a random event, but it was obviously clearly a punishment for specific sin. So libam, their hearts, kilomar, also bayashem ponim elav, the house that they turned to, what they looked at as their heart, as opposed to what we look at as our heart, nifka, right? Umatzavam lo hishtana. They had problems where their house might have fallen in a storm or an earthquake or something, but their nation kept on going. It didn't matter. If it was there, they had a nice building. If it wasn't there, they didn't have a nice building. But that was it. right? As opposed to the Jewish people, where our entire sovereignty, our entire peoplehood rested upon whether or not we had a temple in Jerusalem. Whether or not those nations lasted mattered, whether they had a lot of people to defend themselves, or maybe they were too small and they couldn't stand up to their enemies.
Rabbi.
Yes, I see your hand is up. I want to try to get through the
Yeah,
paragraph.
sure.
To see whether they're powerful or weak, right? Or are there civil wars? Are they fighting with each other? Or are they united and able to put a good front against their enemies? Everything that happens among those nations happens according to the rules of nature and according to the rules of chance. Things happen, they don't happen, they do, they don't, they might, they should, they could, they would, they sort of would. Right? That's how it works. What Rabbi Levi here is asserting an idea which has become a central idea in many streams of Jewish thought, that there's a special type of hashgacha, a special type of providence that the Jewish people have that other nations don't, right? And that's what he's asserting here. And I want you to, I'm not here to agree or disagree. I will tell you that this is absolutely a non-Maimonidean approach, but this is Rabbi Levi's approach, and he was really the one that put this on the table, right, in Jewish thought. Ve'ilu anu kasher nifka libenu. However, us, if when our heart got harmed, when our Beis Hamikdash, when our temple was destroyed, Beis Hamikdash avadnu, we were lost, we were done. Because when the building was harmed, so were we. When we lost the temple, we were done with. Our everything was gone, right? Bain imnihia rabim, bain ma'atim. Whether we could have been millions of people or few. V'chol matzav she'ez dam, in whatever situation we were in. Ki hamechaber osanu, right? Hu Elohach achachai, right? What is it that attaches us, right? Right, to this place? What is it that we are attached to? It is to God, the living God himself. Hu konenu, he is the one that owns us, and keeps us and sustains us during this time now when we are spread out and we are separated from God. He is the one that still sustains us, right, and keeps us together. But we see how for us it's all dependent one on the other, and that's the significance of the temple. Now, there was a few people. Yosef had his hand up first, so I'll go to you first. I just want to finish that paragraph.
But yeah, for sure. So 2 comments. One is that if I remember when I learned the Kuzari 30 years ago, the prophets of the nations like Bilam and Avimelech, Paro, their prophecy was concerning Israel only, and that's why they're recorded. Yeah. And the second is that even Maimonides would agree that that after the temple was destroyed, the Talmud tells us that nevuah nitna l'shotim v'laktanim, so that both of them, I think, agree that even if there is prophecy today, it's said by people who aren't spiritually ready to deliver it, and therefore. And therefore, it could be anybody, but we don't have the tools to decide which is from God and which isn't.
Well, Rambam actually, even though Chazal do say that what you just said about the prophecy being given to fools, and Rambam categorically disagreed with that, despite the fact that Chazal said that. The Rambam rejected that, and he said it's impossible that prophecy could rest on somebody who's a fool. How he dealt with that Chazal is a different story, but he, in a similar way, that the Kuzari's statement, one way of trying to kind of sort of get around it is by saying that those prophecies were related to Israel. But the bottom line is that the yesod, the basic premise that the Kuzari so eloquently developed, the whole idea of prophecy, according to the Kuzari, could only possibly reside among a Jew, and it is contradicted by places in Chazal and Tanakh, but they both have the contradictions, but they're finding other sources, and they would probably answer something along the lines, well, there's different opinions, but but what you said about prophecy, you're absolutely right. Chazal does say that, but the Rambam absolutely, categorically, and more Nevuchim disagrees. Now, how could that be? How could he disagree with the Gemara? That's a whole different subject. But he does disagree, right? So because their understandings of prophecy are obviously very different. And so you're raising good points, but I think the Kuzari consistently says what he says, and the Rambam says what he says. But anyway, so
Thank you.
yeah, Jeffrey, now you're
Yeah,
second in line. Go ahead.
Thanks. Is this passage we've just read related to what I've been reading in the Tanya, that we Jews have two souls, one of which is a divine soul, and that other nations don't have two souls? It's something unique. Is this in any way related to that, or is this an entirely different stream of thinking?
Well, he's not in this particular passages. He's not directly talking about souls.
Okay.
But remind me, was it yesterday we were talking? You mentioned something in Tanya that you learned, and I told you it was off the camera.
Yeah.
It was, and I told you that the basis was laid in the Kuzari.
Oh, yeah.
What were we talking about? Can you remind me?
What I was talking about is something I've been troubled with, that the Tanya essentially gives Jews a separate classification, that and that the other nations of the world do not have a divine soul. We do. We have two souls.
Yeah. So the idea of souls, two souls, we will find that some of the foundations of that idea you can definitely trace back to the Kuzari, right? And the idea that the entire spiritual makeup of a Jew is different, right? That a Jew has this divine essence which others don't have, right? Now, and the Tanya is just a great example, right? And I'm glad you brought it up, because I wanted to say this, is that the entire Tanya rests, right? The Sefer Tanya, and I know if there may be people out there that might get upset at me for saying this, but I told you before, I personally studied Tanya by one very Chabad master, who I studied with for years and years and years, many hours. We studied Tanya together, and then I studied with my father. I learned the whole Tanya together also. So I don't claim necessarily that I'm an expert, but I am familiar with it. And Hasidus in general, I spent a significant amount of my time studying Hasidus, Sifrei Hasidus, and which is, but that entire school of thought rests on, to a large degree, on Kabbalistic a background, mostly on Lurianic Kabbalah. Of course, it takes it all, in its own directions. But all of that, right? All of that school of thought, you can trace it back to the Kuzari, right? If the Kuzari gave the philosophical underpinnings that were necessary for that entire structure to be built, so that all of the whole idea that there's an essence, a Jewish essence, right? Now, I'm not saying that there aren't traces prior to the Kuzari and sources that say things that lead one in this direction. Of course there are. The Kuzari didn't just pop out in the middle of the blue. Rabbi Levi didn't just make these things up and pull them out of his magic hat. The Kuzari was the one who really took all of that out of Chazal and encapsulated it and wrote a book about it and slammed it into the Jewish consciousness, right? So now this is how Jews think about themselves, right? So and that's the reason why I chose this book, because you can study almost every mystical stream of thought. When I say mystical may not be the right term, but I don't know what the best term is. The non-rational stream of thought. So take the non-Maimonidean streams of thought within Judaism. Almost every path you take, you trace it straight back to the Kuzari. And that's just a fact of Jewish philosophical history. So the Kuzari is, of course, he's drawing these thoughts from Chazal, right? So, but this whole idea that there's a special Jewish essence, there's a special divine providence that Jews have that non-Jews don't have. That's specifically what he just talked about in the paragraph we just read. He wasn't talking about souls, but these are ideas that if not for the Kuzari, they would not be such basic concepts that abound within certain schools of Jewish thought. And that's why it's so important to understand this book. And as we learn through it, you'll understand more and more and more. So many things in Judaism will make sense to you. What certain, and you can choose to like it or not. You can decide you want to be a Maimonidean, right? That's fine. But it's really important to get this. So let's do paragraph number 33. And here the Kuzari, the Chazar king, says something fascinating. Omar HaKuzari, says the Chazar king, the king of the Chazars, Ochein, ein lahalos al hadas, because remember, now we are all in exile, right? And despite being in exile, right, God is still the one who is giving us the strength to get through this exile, because we at least are a pile of bones, right, that were once sustained through the temple, but now we lost so much of that connection, but we're still being sustained by God. But it's ein lahalos al hadas pizur kozeh. It's hard to imagine, it's impossible to imagine realistically such a scattering, le'uma, for a nation, such a diaspora and an exile for a nation, that it shouldn't just assimilate and become another nation, right? Especially such a long time. And remember, he was saying this 1,000 years ago. Now it's another 1,000 years, right? And we still managed to remain a Jewish nation, right? Any other nation in that lengthy period of time would have disappeared by now, right? How many nations that didn't even come into existence until after you guys, the nikhadu, and they're gone. We don't even there's nothing left of them. Keep going. Edom, the Idumeans, Moab, the Moabites, Ammon, the Ammonites, Aram, the Arameans, Peleshet, I'm not sure what that is, Kasdim, the Chaldeans, Madai, the Medians, Yavan, the Greeks, Habrama, the Brahmins, presumably that's the Indians or something. I don't know exactly what Vatsabia and the Sabians, Verabos, Ulas, and many of them. Exactly which ones he's referring to doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that there's other nations that have come into existence and have disappeared, and you guys are still hanging around. So there must be something special, right? Now, this is a proof. Yeah.
Plashet is probably the Philistines.
Oh, yeah.
And,
okay. Yeah.
And the tziva is what Rambam talks about when he talks about the korbanot, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
the
Sabians.
tziva.
Yeah, the Rambam talks a lot about the Sabians. I'm not exactly sure. The Sabians, I always thought of as just kind of a catch term for the various tribes that ran around Arabia and were pagans and not, prior to Islam. That's the way I always think of it. But there may have been, presumably there must have been a nation somewhere called the Sabians. But the point being, though, that and Peleshet, you're right, is the Philistines, the Yoshvei Peleshes, right? So regardless, all those nations came and went, and the Jewish people. So there must be something special. So, but you have to read into this question something important. So what he's answering here is, I don't think anyone that knows even the slightest smidgen of anything about history, right, isn't awed by that, right? I mean, when we look, he's right. Every other nation, any other nation that was destroyed by war, right, and exiled and enslaved and scattered across the world, especially ones that this happened to thousands of years ago, are gone, right? So you might read something about them in the history books, maybe, depending on how big or how important they might have thought themselves to be. But other than that, they're gone. But the Jewish people is still here, right? And that's remarkable. It's remarkable. Now, why is that, right? So I'm not going to give you an answer to Jewish history right now, but I will tell you what the Kuzari just told us, right? Read into his words. What he's saying, the Chazar king's question was, I can't imagine that without that special relationship with God and that special sustenance that you get because of that relationship, right? Any other nation surviving without that. So what the Kuzari is telling us, or Rabbi Levi is telling us, is his understanding of why the Jewish people are so remarkable. It's because of that special divine essence. All right. So now you might go to a history class and learn a different explanation, right? Or you might yourself believe in a different explanation, right? But that's not the explanation that Rabbi Yehuda Levi is giving, right? He's telling you that it's because of this special divine relationship. So Amar Echaver, right? Um, um, so says the Chaver. So the Rabbi responds to the Chazar king, and he says, "Al tachshov she'ezrasi lecha badibor." Wait, so this is at paragraph 34. So I just turned to page. I'm on page 200 now in the Korobkin version, right? Um, right right that I literally, that means that I aided you in my speech, which is basically saying I guess that's because that was translated from the Arabic, so that must be similar to saying in English something like that I acceded to what you said, that I agreed to your point, right? In other words, before you said that now you guys, you don't have a heart, you don't have a head, right? We said that a few paragraphs ago. So, and I said, you're right, we don't. So don't think that that means that I'm saying that we're dead now. That is over. The show's done, right? Right? I said you're right. We're missing our heart and our head. We're missing our temple, right? We're no longer in our land, right? But that doesn't mean we're gone. Lochen, that's not true. We are still we are still able to connect ourselves to this special spiritual essence through the mitzvos, through the commandments, which God fixed as a something that ties, that binds us, that binds between us and him. Kigon hamila, for example, the mitzvah of circumcision. I'll tell you something interesting. I as an OBGYN, I do circumcisions often for baby boys when the parents want it. And I have a med student with me now. I just, this January, I started the Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine sends some of their students to rotate with me. So I haven't been a teacher of medicine in a while, and it's a really cool opportunity finally to go back to doing something I never did in a long time. So today, my student who's rotating with me now is asking me, she knew I was going to do a circumcision today. So yesterday she was asking me about circumcision and how do we do it and what's the, what are the technique and things like that. So I explained there's different ways, and there's a clamp that I use when I do it. It's called a Mogen clamp. And a Mogen clamp, for anyone that knows Hebrew, will recognize right away. It comes from the word Magen. A Magen is a shield, right? Like a Magen David, the shield of David, right? As Magen. And it's really designed after the traditional circumcision shield that Jewish communities have been used. So I started so I looked online, and I gave her a little bit of a lecture on the history of circumcision clamps. And if you go online, you can look up pictures from Jewish museums around the world, and they have exhibits of, from all types of places. And the first one that pops up was a circumcision shield from the Jewish community of Iran in the 17th century. It's on exhibit at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And it's just, so we had a nice discussion, whatever, fine. But I'm just walking away and thinking, like, it's pretty remarkable. We have that circumcision shield, that mitzvah, that's being done 400 years ago in Iran, right? That's like, and the same shield is being used in Poland by my ancestors, right? And some of you here might have ancestors, who knows where? I don't know. It could have been anywhere. Morocco, I don't know. Pick your place. And we're using the same thing. We're still doing the same thing. It's just truly remarkable. I mean, there's really something to be immensely, immensely proud of. So, however you look at it, whatever you understand the reason, it's certainly something to be proud of, something special that no other nation in the world can lay claim to this special achievement, really. So, for example, the mitzvah of Mila, so he's talking now about the mitzvot, through which we connect to God. Shenemarla, which it says regarding Mila, my covenant will be in your flesh, lebris olam, for a covenant forever. Via Shabbos, and the mitzvah of Shabbat, of Sabbath, shenemar al odosea, which it says regarding Shabbos, ki osi beini uvenechem ladorosechem. No, note, he's specifically choosing things that state that they are forever. In other words, they last. Even when the temple is no longer in existence, we still have these mitzvot through which we have this connection, right? Levad mi bris avos bris Torah, other than the special covenant he made with our forefathers, the special covenant he made by giving us the Torah, asher chiyavos pam b'chorev, right? Which he obligated us to keep the Torah both at Chorev, meaning our Sinai, and then again in Arvos Moav, im havtocha, together with the promise of l'sachar, of reward for keeping it, v'ha'iyom ba'onish, and threatening us with punishment if we don't keep it. He brings the the parsha in the Torah which describes the tochacha, that describes the the suffering that could happen if we don't keep the Torah properly. So and everything that's included in there, Kolomar Devar Yisala, his words work. Kel Rachum Hashem, God is a merciful God, Elokecha, God, your God. Lo Yarpacha, he will not leave you alone. He will not allow you to be abandoned. He will not destroy you. He will never forget the covenant he made with your forefathers, that he swore to them. And for example, Parshas V'haya, when these things happen, and you will return to God. In other words, these things, meaning the exile, the destruction, all of these are in the books of Deuteronomy. If your people will be scattered to the edges of the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you, he will take you from there, and God will bring you to the land that your forefathers inherited, and you will inherit it, and God will be good to you, and he will increase your numbers even over Veshiras Ha'azinu, V'zulasan, and also the Parsha Ha'azinu, which talks about their future redemption, and so on, other places in the Torah. So there's plenty of examples in the Torah that demonstrate that God's special relationship is meant forever and doesn't go away just because we lost the land of Israel, just because we lost the temple. As important as that was, and how much we described it before, so therefore we are not like dead. Right? Even though I admitted to you, yeah, you're right, we lost our heart and our brain, we're not dead. We are like a very, very sick person, right? A person who is terminally ill. The doctors gave up on us already. The doctor said, we don't have any medicine that works. There's no more surgery that can help you. You're out of our hands. Go to hospice. It's time to just settle with the fact that it's over. Right? So then the person doesn't want to give up. And he hopes and he prays and he says just some miracle. He's not ready to give up, even though there's nothing he could do anymore, at least within normal rules of science. Right? He's asking for something to happen that's out of the normal nature of the world. The same way, right, that Ezekiel was asked in his vision of the dry bones, and he said, can these bones become alive again? Right? In other words, that's impossible. Yeah, these bones once were part of human beings, but now they're a pile of bones. Can they become alive? Not in any natural way, of course not. And from the book of Isaiah, where it says, Lo toar v'lo adar u'chumas terpanim mimenu, kolomar, shehu mitzad hameos hachitoni v'kir hamara b'chinas devarim hamagilim. Right? That's talking about because it's this when something is so disgusting and despised and sick in such a terrible way, right? I'm gonna finish this paragraph, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this probably next time. But give me a minute, because this last few lines here are closely related to the conversation that's going to happen in 35, 36, 37, 38, right? Which we're not going to unfortunately have time to get to tonight. It's referring to the people of Israel who are sick and ill in such a way. Well, just to say, I'm just going to say it straight. Rabbi Yehuda Levi right here is throwing in something for a very, very deliberate reason, and we can't miss it, right? There's polemics going on here, right? And Rabbi Yehuda Levi is quoting. He could have chosen hundreds of things in Tanakh, but he deliberately chose Isaiah 53, right? Because he was referring to the Jewish people. He set this up, right? Because he wanted to make this point, right? The Jewish people are sick, like a sick person who there's no hope for him anymore. He's suffering, he's hurt, he's in pain, right? In the same way that Isaiah 53 describes the Jewish people as the people that are suffering and in pain and full of illness with no hope for any salvation other than God himself. Now, I'm sure some of you may know, some of you may not know. If you've ever talked to a Christian who's tried to convert you, the Isaiah 53 is the first thing they start yelling at you, right? Because they understand that this chapter is referring to Jesus, right? And who suffered and so on and so forth. So, but obviously the Yehuda Levi is just explaining what the chapter is talking about, and it's talking about the suffering Jewish people. But we're going to talk about that more at length. So if that topic interests you at all, I promise we're not going to ignore it. We'll get into it in more depth next time, because the Kuzari is going to ask him a question about that last little statement he just made, right? Which is we're going to read in paragraph 35 next, and Rabbi Yehuda Levi is going to give a chaver a chance to describe that entire chapter, what it means, what it's about. But he's bringing it up for a reason. Remember, he's talking to this Khazar king who was just searching. He asked the Christians, he asked the Muslims. So there's a reason why he chose Isaiah 53, and that's the reason why. But regardless, the main point that he was making in 34 was the bottom line, is that we are not dead yet. We're sick, right? And which is why the prophet Isaiah chose to describe us as people who are sick. We are ill, right? But we're not dead, because we still have an attachment to God, and one day he's going to bring us back and he's going to make us better. And I think that's a good point to stop at tonight, and then we'll continue next week with actually, I must apologize. Next week, I won't be able to teach next week. I'm going to be at a medical conference out of town. So I'm going to have to skip next week. So won't be next week. It'll be whatever. I guess the 18th, February 18th will be the next time. So you're going to have to stay in suspense for 2 weeks.
Could you clarify that? So you won't be here next week?
Right. Next week, I'm not going to be teaching.
And the following week?
But the following week, I should be
the
back
18th.
online.
So the 18th, you will be here.
Yeah, Samir Tzashem. Yeah, just the 11th, I'm going to be out of town. I'm going to be at a conference. So I don't think I'll be able to teach. But so we have a few minutes to talk. So if you want to talk about Isaiah 53, I'm happy to talk about it, but let's leave it to next time.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So, he talks about this special relationship to God, and that's why we survived, and all of these things are based on our special relationship and our special soul with God, the spark with God, and so on. Where, he obviously didn't invent the wheel. I mean, this came from somewhere, and he made it. He pushed it out. But where did that come from? Do we have a source for that?
Well, I mean, let's just give an example. The special covenant, right, that he just described, right, between God and the Jewish people. What does that covenant mean? How do you translate that? Like, how do you understand that? Right. So if understood in its most literal sense, right, there's a special promise that he made to us, right, in the book of Dvarim, where it talks about, and in context of that promise, God says, if you keep the Torah, I will be there with you, right? If you don't keep the Torah, I will punish you, right? So if you read through Devarim, right, the book of Deuteronomy, that's one conclusion. There's different ways you can read the book, right? But
Yeah.
but one can certainly read it this way. It's a very legitimate reading of the book of
But again,
Deuteronomy.
that's an old idea that everyone knew about. What did he add to it that made it just sort of take off? That's
Well,
what I don't understand. This is not a new concept. What did he add to it that made people just take off with it, or did he?
the one thing is, first of all, the Torah doesn't talk about a special spiritual essence that's present within the souls of certain people and not in the souls of
Yeah,
others, right?
that's what. Yeah. So where
Okay.
did that come from? Yeah.
There's probably people more smarter than me that could answer that question. But
Banim atem Hashem Elokechem.
yeah, I mean, there is Chazal, there's Gemara that talks about at Har Sinai how we received special crowns, right? There's lots of divrei Chazal, the words of the rabbis that reference things that depending on how you interpret it, right? Right.
Yeah.
Maimonidean would interpret that's I just gave an example, right, of the crowns that we received,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if you can understand that as some special spiritual essence that was granted to us that envelops us and lights up, whatever, right? Or you can understand, it's a nice metaphoric way of a crown is something which we're proud of, which gives us pride, which is special, and the Torah is something which gives us, it's special and gives us pride. So it's a metaphor. So
but even in the Pshat, Banim atem Hashem Elokechem, or Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, it means that we or Am Segula, all of those things point that somehow we have a different quality. It's not physical. It's not it's not of any kind of reward in this world specifically. It's just about that connection. So you quoted, well, you didn't quote Jesus before, but Jesus has this parable about the prodigal son who wasted all of the inheritance and everything and is coming back. So that's technically what we are. We are the one son that no matter how down we went or how far we went away, Hashem says, "I did not divorce you" in Yeshayahu, right? And all the other things that basically Hashem says, "I have a special relationship with you, and nobody can take that away, and even you can't throw it away because no matter what, I'm there for you." So
yeah, I'm going to challenge you, Jack. Next time when what's this week's parsha? Is
Jethro.
Yithro. Okay. Oh, so that's a really good one. So you can try to read the verse as a Levian, a Judah HaLevian philosopher. Various verses. We'll pick a few. I should be in Shul this weekend. I'm on call, but I'm only covering the emergency room, and I'm usually able to be up there, right?
Okay.
So that's my plan. Amir Tzisham, God willing. So we'll find a verse and you look at it and read it as a Yehuda Halevi philosopher and a Maimonidean philosopher. And you're going to read two different verses. You'll see two different things, right?
Yeah.
But you'll certainly see in those verses. And then when we look at the Medrash and the rabbinic understandings of those verses, you'll read two different rabbinic understandings. The same words will mean two totally different things, right? Right. Yeah. Now there will be things that sound a lot more like Levi's, right? Rabbi Yehuda Levi's way. And Maimonides would be kind of a stretch. You can probably squish it into the words, but it's to be a bit of a stretch. But then there's going to be other things which are the other way around. They sound very Maimonidean, but you can try to stretch in Rabbi Yehuda Levi's way of thinking, right?
Well, but that's a good exercise.
Yeah, and you'll see it.
I mean, you could do it with this. I mean, you could say, for instance, that the Torah in Maimonidean philosophy, you'd say that cultural, intellectual, educational structures, based on Torah, is what really creates this special relationship with God. It's not just made, you have to work at it. And so if you have a structure of culture, intellectual learning, education, these things that are important in practice based on Torah, that this is what this is what it is. It's not just something that's given to us.
Right.
We have to work for it to some degree. I mean, to me, that's what Maimonides would say about this. Is that?
Yeah,
is
you're
that
definitely on the right track. No question about it.
Yeah, so that's sort of what I was thinking about when you went through this. So anyway,
yeah. Anyway, but that's why it's really important for us to learn both. But anyway, Barry, I saw you had your hand up. Sorry.
So we have from the prophets that when we went into exile, we discovered that God came into exile with us. I don't know if that's midrash or that's from the Nevi'im.
Well, the primary source of that idea is from Ezekiel, from Yechezkel. Right.
We also have in the later chapters of Isaiah, Isaiah, when it refers to the servant in the singular, do we take it that he's referring to a descendant of King David, or is he referring to the people itself? Oh, you want to leave that?
Leave Isaiah 53 to next time.
Oh, okay. Well, it's not just 53. The servant
well, that's actually the main point, really. It's not just 53. It's actually that entire section of Yeshayahu, right?
Okay, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The entire section talks about Avdi Yaakov, my servant Jacob. Avdi is Israel, my servant Israel. And
not
then 53 pops. It refers to Israel, and it explicitly describes my servant Israel, my servant Jacob, over and over and over again, repeatedly, right? In the singular, it refers to the Jewish people as a person. For some reason, Christians decided that in this one chapter, that it's referring to a specific guy and not a people, even though in every other chapter before it and after it, like repeatedly over and over and over again, it's referring to the people of Israel. But I just totally went off on a totally different subject. And you can, if you meet your friendly fundamentalist, Christian down the block, you can argue with them till your face is green, blue, yellow, purple, or you're red and pink, and you're not going to get anywhere. But regardless, it's been an argument that's been going on for thousands of years, and probably will continue to go on for another couple of thousand years until the real Messiah comes, I guess. but regardless, it's one of the most misunderstood chapters in Tanakh, but we'll talk about it more next time. You got 2 weeks to read up on it, and then you guys will be bigger experts than me. But anyway, but the Kuzari specifically brought it up here because he referred to the Jewish people as being sick and ill while we are in exile. So it was the perfect image. Right. And it was this perfect opportunity to take a swipe at the Christians, which is part of the reason for this book. All right.
In modern times, something that's so meaningful in our relations with our Christian neighbors is to invite them to a Pesach Seder. I think they come away from that. They come away from that with a different idea about our formative experience and our survival.
Yeah, I enjoy dialogue with people that are reasonable and really want to talk and share ideas. There's a lot of wisdom we can learn from everyone.
Yeah.
But if you try to argue about Isaiah 53, forget it. Don't even go there. It's just not worth it. No matter how reasonable they are, they will suddenly turn into completely like a block of wood. So it's just not worth it.
Well, I
talk with them about anything you want. Go ahead, feel free, have fun. Please do, and you'll learn a lot because they have a lot. We all have a lot to teach each other. But don't bother arguing with them about that. That's just my personal advice. You can do what you want, but anyway, all right. So we are. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. It was really fun tonight. So 2 weeks in Mirza Shem, we'll be back together and we'll keep on rolling.
Thank you, Saul.
All right, you're welcome. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.
Thanks, Saul.
Yes, bye-bye.